It all started like any other routine project. I had been in construction for decades, and over the years, I'd learned to treat clients with professionalism first and foremost. That was my rule. Never blur the line between work and personal interest. But that rule was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. It was a chilly January morning when I first stepped onto the grounds of the school my company had been contracted to renovate. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the freshly paved courtyard, and there was that faint smell of wet concrete lingering in the air. I had my clipboard in hand, checklist ready, and my mind was firmly in project mode. That was until I saw her. Jane. That's not her real name, but it fits her sharp, commanding, yet undeniably captivating. She was the business manager at the school, someone who clearly handled her responsibilities with precision. I had met dozens of clients before, and many had charm, but Jane carried it differently. She walked with a quiet confidence, her posture impeccable, yet there was a subtle warmth in her smile that drew people in. The first time our eyes met, something about the way she sized me up, her gaze lingering just long enough, sent a strange flutter through my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination. I had been around enough people to know that a little flirtation here and there was harmless, often unintentional. We were introduced formally as part of the site walk. She extended her hand, firm grip, eyes bright, and a flash of amusement crossed her face as if she already knew I'd be meticulous with the inspection. I nodded in return, introduced myself, and went through the motions of reviewing the project milestones, the finishes, the layout. I noticed her asking questions, not just about the construction, but about how certain choices might impact students and staff. Her curiosity wasn't just professional. There was a spark of interest that made the air between us feel charged, even if subtly. Throughout the morning, I caught myself stealing glances. She had a way of listening that made you feel like the only person in the room mattered. Her laugh, when she did laugh, wasn't loud or forced. It was easy, natural, and it lingered in my ears longer than it should have. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand: the drywall, the paint, the slight misalignment on a window frame, but there was a tension building. A magnetic pull I couldn't quite place. After the walkthrough, she suggested a quick coffee at a small cafe next door. At first, I hesitated. I reminded myself she was a client. This was a professional interaction, nothing more. But the invitation came with a smile, warm, inviting, and I felt a flutter of anticipation. I agreed. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place that smelled faintly of roasted beans and vanilla, with soft jazz playing in the background. We picked a small table by the window. I took a seat, trying to act casual, though my heart was racing slightly faster than usual. Conversation flowed easily. She asked about my work, but she also asked about me, my hobbies, my family. Little details that revealed an unexpected curiosity. We shared laughs over minor misunderstandings on the project and anecdotes from previous renovations. The more we talked, the less I felt like a project manager dealing with a client, and the more I felt intrigued, alive. I remember noticing, in the corner of my eye, how she twirled a strand of hair round her finger when she laughed, and how the light from the window made her eyes shimmer. My mind tried to push it away, reminding me of the professional boundaries, but the pull was undeniable. There was no overt flirting yet, nothing unprofessional. Just a charged energy in the air, a subtle undercurrent that neither of us spoke aloud. And then, casually, she mentioned a work function she had that Saturday night. She said it lightly, almost as if mentioning the weather, but there was something in her tone, a teasing lilt that made my stomach twist. "Would you like to come?" she asked. My mind froze for a moment. This was unusual, but the way she asked it wasn't purely professional. There was an undertone, an unspoken suggestion that this was more than a networking opportunity. I surprised myself by saying yes. Part of me knew this was stepping into dangerous territory, but attraction, that uncontrollable human response, had its grip on me, and I couldn't deny it. She smiled, a brief, knowing smile that hinted she was aware of the effect she had on people. She told me to meet her at her place so we could take an Uber together. Keep things casual on the way, have a few drinks, and then head to the event. I left that cafe with a strange mixture of anticipation and apprehension. My mind raced through the possibilities, all the while reminding me, over and over, she's a client. Don't overstep. But the magnetism between us was impossible to ignore. There was a current pulling me toward something exhilarating and uncertain. That weekend arrived faster than I expected. When I stepped into Jane's apartment, my heart was already racing. She opened the door with that mischievous smile, the kind that made you feel like you were expected. The apartment wasn't huge, but everything was neatly arranged, with little touches that showed her taste. A small vase of flowers on the table, a few simple but striking paintings on the walls. The place felt warm, inviting, and yet my heart kept thudding because I knew I was stepping into uncharted territory. We called an Uber together to the event. On the way, our conversation flowed easily from work and the event itself to lighter, personal stories. Jane shared funny incidents at the school, and I talked about memorable experiences in construction. But beneath the casual chat, there was an unmistakable tension. Glances lingered, smiles lasted a fraction too long, pauses felt full of meaning. I could feel myself being drawn closer to her, even as my brain kept repeating, "Stay professional. She's a client." When we arrived, the space was glowing with soft lighting, the music mellow and inviting. There were plenty of colleagues and other guests, but all I could see was Jane. She wore a perfectly tailored dress, elegant, understated, yet undeniably alluring. As she guided me through the crowd, taking my hand in a brief touch that sent a jolt through me, I realized the intimacy between us was quietly shifting, moving beyond mere professional boundaries. Throughout the evening, our conversation became increasingly personal. Jane pulled me onto the dance floor when a slow song played, her hands warm and steady on mine, bodies close. Every movement, every glance, was charged with a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. I forgot everything else: the project, the deadlines, the professional rules, leaving only the two of us, the music, and this overwhelming attraction. Later, she led me to the window to look out over the city night. A light breeze stirred her hair, and she tilted her head toward me, eyes deep, saying everything without words. My heart raced, not just because of her beauty, but because of the confidence and presence she carried in every gesture. As the event wound down, Jane suggested we grab a drink nearby before heading home. We found a small, cozy bar and sat across from each other under the warm glow of the lights. The conversation now carried a subtle flirtation, teasing questions, playful remarks, a gentle testing of boundaries. I realized she was gauging me, seeing how I would respond, how far I might be willing to go. Returning to her apartment, the air between us felt electric. Jane invited me inside, and I stepped in, heart pounding. She disappeared briefly to change, returning in a delicate, semi-sheer robe that was both elegant and provocative. She sat close to me on the couch, eyes full of intent. In that instant, the line between us vanished. Within moments, we were caught up in a whirlwind of passion, as if we were teenagers discovering this intensity for the first time. Reason evaporated. All that remained was the thrill, curiosity, and pure exhilaration. I left her apartment the next morning feeling lightheaded, elated, and with a quiet, simmering desire to see where this could go. A week later, Jane called, asking if I wanted to spend the next weekend at her place. Without hesitation, I said yes. That weekend, we barely left the bedroom, only stepping out for meals. Every moment was intense, consuming, making me feel like we had our own world, entirely separate from normal life. Then, after the first week, the shock came. When I called to invite Jane to my place for the following weekend, she said casually, "My husband just got back from a business trip in China. This weekend won't work." I couldn't believe my ears. Her words, calm and casual as if nothing had happened, hit me like a punch. I felt deceived, betrayed, furious like the rug had been pulled out from under me. I told her immediately, firmly, "I don't date married people. I don't want to see you again." I hung up, a mix of anger and disappointment roiling inside me. But part of me couldn't let it go. I wondered, should her husband know the truth? And in a mix of outrage and moral responsibility, I did something that would ignite a storm. I found her husband on Facebook and messaged him, explaining everything. 2 days later, Jane called repeatedly, bombarding me with texts, calling me a pause, telling me I had no right to interfere in her marriage, that I had ruined her family. But I stood my ground. I despise cheaters, and I couldn't sit quietly knowing the truth. That weekend arrived faster than I expected. When I stepped into Jane's apartment, my heart was already racing. She opened the door with that mischievous smile, the kind that made you feel like you were expected. The apartment wasn't huge, but everything was neatly arranged, with little touches that showed her taste. A small vase of flowers on the table, a few simple but striking paintings on the walls. The place felt warm, inviting, and yet my heart kept thudding because I knew I was stepping into uncharted territory. We called an Uber together to the event. On the way, our conversation flowed easily from work and the event itself to lighter, personal stories. Jane shared funny incidents at the school, and I talked about memorable experiences in construction. But beneath the casual chat, there was an unmistakable tension. Glances lingered, smiles lasted a fraction too long, pauses felt full of meaning. I could feel myself being drawn closer to her, even as my brain kept repeating, "Stay professional. She's a client." When we arrived, the space was glowing with soft lighting, the music mellow and inviting. There were plenty of colleagues and other guests, but all I could see was Jane. She wore a perfectly tailored dress, understated, yet undeniably alluring. As she guided me through the crowd, taking my hand in a brief touch that sent a jolt through me, I realized the intimacy between us was quietly shifting, moving beyond mere professional boundaries. Throughout the evening, our conversation became increasingly personal. Jane pulled me onto the dance floor when a slow song played, her hands warm and steady on mine, bodies close. Every movement, every glance, was charged with a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. I forgot everything else: the project, the deadlines, the professional rules, leaving only the two of us, the music, and this overwhelming attraction. Later, She led me to the window to look out over the city night. A light breeze stirred her hair, and she tilted her head toward me, eyes deep, saying everything without words. My heart raced, not just because of her beauty, but because of the confidence and presence she carried in every gesture. As the event wound down, Jane suggested we grab a drink nearby before heading home. We found a small, cozy bar and sat across from each other under the warm glow of the lights. The conversation now carried a subtle flirtation, teasing questions, playful remarks, a gentle testing of boundaries. I realized she was gauging me, seeing how I would respond, how far I might be willing to go. Returning to her apartment, the air between us felt electric. Jane invited me inside, and I stepped in, heart pounding. She disappeared briefly to change, returning in a delicate, semi-sheer robe that was both elegant and provocative. She sat close to me on the couch, eyes full of intent. In that instant, the line between us vanished. Within moments, we were caught up in a whirlwind of passion, as if we were teenagers discovering this intensity for the first time. Reason evaporated. All that remained was the thrill, curiosity, and pure exhilaration. I left her apartment the next morning feeling lightheaded, elated, and with a quiet, simmering desire to see where this could go. A week later, Jane called, asking if I wanted to spend the next weekend at her place. Without hesitation, I said yes. That weekend, we barely left the bedroom, only stepping out for meals. Every moment was intense, consuming, making me feel like we had our own world, entirely separate from normal life. Then, after the first week, the shock came. When I called to invite Jane to my place for the following weekend, she said casually, "My husband just got back from a business trip in China. This weekend won't work." I couldn't believe my ears. Her words, calm and casual, as if nothing had happened, hit me like a punch. I felt deceived, betrayed, furious, like the rug had been pulled out from under me. I told her immediately, firmly, "I don't date married people. I don't want to see you again." I hung up, a mix of anger and disappointment roiling inside me. But part of me couldn't let it go. I wondered, should her husband know the truth? And in a mix of outrage and moral responsibility, I did something that would ignite a storm. I found her husband on Facebook and messaged him, explaining everything. 2 days later, Jane called repeatedly, bombarding me with texts, calling me a puss, telling me I had no right to interfere in her marriage, that I had ruined her family. But I stood my ground. I despised cheaters, and I couldn't sit quietly knowing the truth. After I sent the message to Jane's husband, the next few days felt like being caught in an uncontrollable emotional storm. My phone kept buzzing, her texts flooding in, swinging between anger, blame, and sometimes pleading. Each message felt like a dagger to my psyche. "You have no right. You've ruined everything. I'll make you regret this." I read and reread them, my heart racing, a mix of satisfaction for doing what I believed was right and sheer anxiety over what she might do. Next, I reminded myself to stay calm. This wasn't about personal feelings anymore. It was about ethics, responsibility, and a man's right to know the truth. I had made a choice, and now I had to stand by it, no matter the pressure. But the pressure didn't just come from Jane. A part of me questioned whether I had overstepped, whether intruding into someone else's private life was wrong. Could my actions be seen as destroying a family, or were they genuinely protecting fairness? These thoughts swirled endlessly in my mind, keeping me awake at night, making meals tasteless. and forcing me to replay the weekend at Jane's over and over. Her eyes, her smile, every intimate touch, now all feeling like wounds. Jane didn't give me a moment's peace. She called constantly, texted relentlessly, even showed up near my office, radiating intimidation. One afternoon, as I was in the building lobby, she appeared with that cold smile and a look that said she was watching every move I made. "Do you really think you can do this without anyone knowing? I'll make you regret ruining my family," she said. I knew that even though I felt justified, I was standing on a precarious line between right and wrong in the eyes of society. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was about reputation, workplace credibility, and the perception of others. I had to learn to say no, to stay silent, and protect myself without letting emotions dictate my actions. During this time, I began to understand the complexity of human psychology. Jane was the woman I had been infatuated with, irresistibly attractive, confident, and magnetic. But now, that very allure became a weapon, pulling me into a tense game of power and emotions. I felt hatred and longing simultaneously, a cocktail of conflicting feelings I could barely comprehend. Hearing that Jane was telling friends and colleagues I was malicious, deliberately trying to destroy her family, added a new layer of pressure. I realized that doing the right thing didn't guarantee peace. It often came with social consequences, misunderstanding, and judgment. One lunch with close friends turned into a moral debate. Some said, if it were my wife, I'd want to know. You did the right thing. They supported my actions, seeing them as an act of truth and integrity. Others, including my boss, warned sternly, "Stop. This is her family's business. You're just stirring the pot." The warnings made me hesitate briefly, but not enough to turn back. I understood that every choice has a cost, and standing by the truth often brings disruption. I had no choice but to continue, even if it meant facing stress and uncertainty for weeks or longer. The situation became even more complicated when Jane started influencing my professional environment. She reached out to colleagues, subtly discrediting me, creating an invisible pressure I could feel every day. I realized that doing the right thing was never simple. It carried responsibility, tension, and sometimes real risk. Through it all, I learned to control my emotions, maintain distance, and see the situation logically. I had to separate personal anger from moral duty. I had to endure the psychological games without losing my ground. Long nights were spent replaying every moment of that weekend. Her smiles, her gaze, her intimate touches. Now, those memories were messy, both beautiful and painful, tinged with regret. I asked myself, if I had known this from the start, would I have gone to her apartment? Could I have kept my wits about me, or would desire have pulled me in again? These experiences taught me that truth is never simple. Facing it brings pressure not only from others, but from one's own conscience and emotions. It's a test of ethics, decisiveness, and self-control. The day after Jane's husband received my message, everything started escalating faster than I could have imagined. I got a long call from Jane. Her voice was tense, trembling, a mix of anger and panic. "Do you think you can just destroy my family and walk away? You're a pause, a terrible person, and I'm not going to let you get away with this." I stood still, listening, feeling as if every word she said was hitting me directly in the chest. But instead of feeling crushed, a new resolve rose inside me. I had made the choice to do what I believed was right, and now I couldn't back down just because of threats. I took a deep breath and responded calmly, "Jane, I don't care what you call me. I just wanted the truth to be known. Your husband deserves to know he's been betrayed." She screamed again and hung up. And within minutes, my phone started buzzing with a flurry of messages. These were no longer just insults, they were threats, coercion, even hints of legal action. Each message hit me like a wave of pressure, my heart racing, my mind straining. I knew that every action I took from this point forward could have far-reaching consequences, affecting not only my personal life, but also my professional reputation. The next day, I heard from a mutual friend that Jane's husband now knew everything. I didn't know how he would react, but the weight of pressure inside me intensified. I realized I was standing in the middle of a storm of social, ethical, and emotional challenges, where any decision could be misunderstood or twisted against me. Sure enough, Jane's husband called me. His voice was calm, steady, but not angry. "I've read all the messages. Thank you for telling me the truth. I need time to process everything, but I want you to know I appreciate your honesty." I felt a slight relief. At least one person in this whole mess understood and respected the truth. But Jane was another story. She wasn't giving up. She continued trying to reach me, calling, texting, even showing up near my workplace a few times. Each encounter carried a glare that could have pierced steel. Every time I saw her, I had to consciously calm my breathing to avoid reacting, rasp. Meanwhile, my own emotions were in turmoil. I still remembered that weekend at Jane's apartment, every intimate moment, every laugh and glance. But now all of it felt tangled with betrayal and disappointment. I kept asking myself, were those moments worth the price I'm paying now? The answer seemed obvious, yet human emotions are never that simple. To navigate the situation, I realized I needed a clear strategy. I couldn't react emotionally, couldn't let Jane manipulate me psychologically, and couldn't ignore the social fallout. I decided to maintain strict distance, minimize communication, and focus on work, friends, and healthy relationships. Over the following weeks, Jane didn't relent. She began spreading the story to some colleagues, trying to undermine my credibility. Each new piece of gossip made me angry, exhausted, but it also reinforced a crucial lesson. Doing the right thing is rarely easy, and sometimes it comes with unavoidable consequences. At the same time, I had to confront my own feelings. I had been used, deceived, and disappointed, but I couldn't let these emotions control my actions. I learned to manage my psyche, stay principled, and view situations through a lens of reason. It was a process of personal growth, a lesson in ethics, and a test of integrity. Another key realization was my perspective on Jane's husband. Despite the chaos, I knew I had to respect his emotions and let him handle the situation on his own terms. I wasn't the one destroying his family, was simply giving him the truth. That awareness helped me remain steady amidst Jane's pressure and the judgments of others. During this time, I also learned to balance social relationships. Some friends supported me, others warned me to be cautious. I learned to listen, filter advice, and make decisions based on my own principles. These experiences helped me see myself more clearly, understand my limits, and recognize the power of standing up for what's right. Gradually, Jane lost her ability to directly influence me. She remained angry, but I had learned to keep my distance and protect myself. Still, the social pressure, gossip, and lingering emotions were ever present in daily life. I had to find a way to live with them, managing work, relationships, and maintaining my principles through all of this, I realized that this story wasn't just about a wild weekend or an affair. It was a profound lesson in ethics, responsibility, personal growth, and facing social pressure head. I came to understand that every decision carries consequences, and sometimes the hardest choice is the one that is ethically and morally right. Daily life continued, but every step, every decision, every moment of calm became proof of personal growth and self-control. I was no longer swept away by emotion or manipulated by anger. I was learning to stand firm on the foundation of truth and integrity. After weeks of tension, things finally began to slow down, though it wasn't exactly peaceful. Jane still carried anger, but she seemed to gradually realize that constant attacks and threatening messages weren't achieving anything. I stopped responding to her calls and texts, and it seemed to frustrate her more than any verbal insults ever could. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering and heard Jane's husband's voice. He sounded calmer than during his first call. "I want to meet you in person," he said. "Not to blame or criticize, but so I can understand everything directly from you." I agreed, though a small knot of tension remained in my stomach. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe, private enough to talk but not awkward. He sat across from me, eyes curious but thoughtful. "I want to thank you," he said, voice steady. "Sometimes the truth hurts, but knowing it is necessary. I appreciate your honesty, and I know that if you hadn't spoken up, things could have been far worse." A wave of relief washed over me. Despite all the pressure and worry, a weight had lifted. I realized that sometimes doing the right thing isn't about recognition or praise. It's about revealing the truth and allowing the people who deserve it to make their own choices. Meanwhile, Jane began to show a different side. She no longer bombarded me with calls or messages. Instead, her texts carried a lighter, almost testing tone, occasionally asking if I wanted things to go back to normal or probing indirectly. I knew these weren't apologies, but attempts to manipulate my emotions. By now, I had the patience and clarity not to fall into her trap. In the following days, I focused on work and healthy relationships around me. I realized that this experience had matured me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I learned to stand firm under pressure, separate emotion from reason, and most importantly, recognize the value of integrity and honesty. One afternoon, as I walked through a park, I saw an older couple arguing, then holding hands and walking away together. I thought about how every relationship faces its own challenges, and how people deal with those challenges shapes their lives and connections. I told myself that I would never compromise my principles, but I also had to learn forgiveness and the ability to face the truth without holding on to long-lasting resentment. Regarding Jane, I heard through mutual friends that she and her husband had long, honest conversations about what happened. Although their relationship remained complicated, at least they had confronted the truth. That gave me some peace. I hadn't destroyed a family. I had merely delivered the truth so they could handle it themselves. I also noticed a change in my own emotions. The initial attraction, the excitement, the intense thrill with Jane had shifted into something different. Awareness, self-respect, and clear boundaries. I understood that the experience had been valuable not for regret, but for growth. Evenings were spent reflecting, journaling, and processing feelings. I realized that emotional and ethical challenges are far more complex than they appear. Sometimes, people must face the truth without expecting reward or recognition, simply to keep themselves grounded. I also learned how to navigate my social circles. Some friends respected me more for how I handled the situation. Others still held prejudices or didn't fully understand. The crucial lesson was not letting external judgment dictate my decisions or values through all of it. The greatest lesson became clear. Honesty, though difficult and sometimes causing conflict, is always the foundation for right decisions. Not for validation, but to preserve integrity, principles, and the ability to stand firm under life's challenges. In the final weeks, the tension gradually eased. Jane stopped trying to contact me directly. Her husband started reorganizing his life, and I returned fully to work, friends, and positive relationships. The experience left a lasting mark not of regret or pain, but of growth and a deeper understanding of my own values. Day by day, I learned to live with the truth, manage pressure and emotions, and most importantly, stand firm without seeking approval from others. Everything from fleeting moments of attraction, social pressures, to inner conflicts became lessons I could carry forward, allowing me to move through life with greater maturity, confidence, and self-respect. Weeks had passed since the tension began to ease, and I started to realize that the story with Jane wasn't just about a brief fling or a fleeting sexual encounter. It was a profound lesson about ethics, boundaries, and the limits we set for ourselves and others. One day, as I sat on my balcony watching the streets below, the afternoon sun casting light on the trees, I found myself asking, if I could go back, would things be different? Would I have had the courage to do the right thing from the start? The answer seemed clear, yet it pushed me to look deeper into myself. I understood that doing the right thing is rarely easy, but it is the only way to feel proud of who you are. Whenever I recalled that weekend with Jane, I could still feel the attraction, the intensity, the thrill like nothing I'd experienced before. But now, that feeling was framed by reality. Honesty, ethics, and respect for others are never things to compromise. Those passionate moments taught me that emotions, no matter how strong, must be paired with awareness and responsibility. I also had to confront disappointment. I once imagined that this relationship could go further, maybe even bring something romantic and meaningful. In reality, it was a test of self-control, personal principles, and moral judgment. This disappointment wasn't meant for regret, but as a reminder of the value of integrity and self-respect. I began viewing my relationships differently. Friends, colleagues, even new acquaintances. I realized that honesty and principles are the foundation for any lasting connection. Relationships built on deception or manipulation only bring pain and loss. I learned to judge people by their actions and character, not just words or appearances. Another key insight was about love and attraction. Before, I often got swept up in temporary emotions, driven by looks or intense desire. The experience with Jane taught me that real love isn't just about attraction, it's about respect, honesty, and accountability. Passionate moments without ethical boundaries and principles are short-lived waves that can leave lasting consequences. I also learned to forgive not Jane, not her actions, but myself for getting entangled in a difficult situation. Forgiving myself lifted a weight, allowing me to see things objectively and stay calm. This was essential for not letting the past control my future. In the following days, I focused more on what truly mattered: work, friends, family, and healthy relationships. I learned to balance emotion and reason, passion and responsibility, attraction and ethics. Step by step, I felt stronger, more grounded, and more confident in every decision I made. One night, I realized the greatest lesson wasn't about what Jane did or said, but how I faced it all. I didn't run, didn't deny, didn't react blindly. I stood firm, confronted the truth, and acted according to my conscience. That made all the difference. I felt free, knowing I was in control of my life. This sense of freedom didn't come from the situation ending, but from awareness. I knew I had done the right thing, wasn't being manipulated, and had grown from the experience. Peace replaced the intensity of past memories. The recollection of Jane's allure remained, but now it was just a part of the past, no longer controlling me. I also learned to view others with empathy and caution. Jane and her husband, despite their complicated relationship, had the chance to face the truth and make their own decisions. I didn't overstep or impose. I let them handle it themselves, respecting boundaries and taking responsibility toward others became a critical lesson from this experience over the next few months. Life returned to its normal rhythm, but different from before. I felt a clear sense of growth in every decision, every action, and every relationship. I was no longer swept away by fleeting emotions or shallow temptations. Instead, I acted from principles, reason, and a deep understanding of my own values. Looking back at the whole story, I realized this experience was a turning point in my life. It taught me not only about ethics, honesty, and love, but also about self-control, facing pressure, and emotional maturity. I understood that everyone faces challenges, and how we respond defines who we truly are. And finally, I realized the most important truth: honesty, personal principles, and the ability to confront reality are values nothing can replace. These experiences, though painful and uncomfortable at times, shaped a more mature version of myself, a person who can stand firm, reflect deeply, and respect both themselves and others. Weeks had passed since the direct conflicts with Jane and her husband had cooled down, but the social fallout of the situation still lingered around me. I realized that one decision, even the morally right one, could create ripples in the social environment. Some colleagues began looking at me differently, not aggressively, but with curious glances and whispers that sometimes made me uncomfortable. Friends, the people I once confided in, had mixed reactions as well. A few were completely supportive, saying that if they were in my position, they would have done the same, because truth is the only thing worth valuing. But others were cautious, warning me that I had interfered too much, that sometimes a person's private life shouldn't become a burden for a third party. This contrast made me realize that regardless of right or wrong, how society perceives things is always complex and multifaceted. My emotions were still unsettled. I had to admit that the attraction to Jane, the intimate and intense moments, still occasionally flitted through my memory, creating a mix of pleasure and discomfort. I asked myself if I had wanted it to go further, but quickly recognized that doing so would have meant losing respect for myself. That was the most important lesson. Temporary passion is never worth sacrificing your principles and personal values at the same time. I witnessed Jane's social reactions. Some colleagues knew parts of the story, and rumors began to spread. I realized that even though I had remained principled and honest, social consequences could still affect my reputation and how others saw me. But instead of panicking or trying to control everyone, I learned to accept that I couldn't control everything, only my actions and responses. Jane's husband, after dealing with the situation, seemed to have regained some stability in their relationship. I heard they had long, honest conversations, and though things remained complicated, they faced the truth. Seeing that brought me a sense of relief. I wasn't the one destroying a family. I had merely delivered the truth so they could handle it themselves. That understanding helped me stay strong against social judgment and the unwarranted guilt Jane had tried to impose. I also began reflecting on myself and my relationships. I realized that this whole process had taught me a lot about patience, resilience under pressure, and how to confront my own emotions. I learned to distinguish between what I could control and what I had to accept. I learned to balance reason and emotion, personal principles and societal pressure. One afternoon, sitting in a familiar cafe and watching the bustling streets outside, I told myself that every experience, painful or uncomfortable, carries its own value. Those intense moments with Jane were not regrets, but lessons in personal growth, helping me understand myself and my boundaries more clearly. I realized that every experience is a test, and how we face those tests shapes who we really are. In the following weeks, I also noticed a shift in how I viewed love and relationships. I understood that real love isn't just about attraction or passion, it's about respect, honesty, and accountability. Moments of desire without ethical grounding are fleeting waves, leaving disappointment and unpredictable consequences. My experience with Jane had made that painfully clear. I also learned forgiveness, not forgiving Jane, but forgiving myself, so I wouldn't carry emotional baggage and could view everything more objectively. Forgiving myself allowed me to stay calm, focus on what mattered, and not let the past dictate my future decisions. Looking back, I realized that the biggest lesson wasn't about Jane's allure or wrongdoing, but about the ability to stand firm, face the truth, and maintain my own principles. Maturity, ethical awareness, and emotional control became the solid foundation on which I could move forward with confidence and peace. Finally, I understood something crucial. Life is never simple. Every choice, every action, no matter how small or large, can have far-reaching effects. But the most important thing is learning to stand strong, uphold your values, and confront everything with courage and integrity. Those lessons, painful, challenging, but invaluably what my experience with Jane left me with, shaping a more mature, self-aware, and resilient version of myself. Weeks had passed since the tension with Jane and her husband had faded, but recovery wasn't as simple as letting time pass or trying to forget. It was a deep, ongoing process that demanded facing emotions, memories, and the lessons each experience left behind. Every day, I realized that invisible scars still lingered, not painful, but reminders of decisions made and the boundaries and ethics I had learned to respect. At first, I felt like I was walking through a dark tunnel, with memories of Jane flickering through my mind, occasionally making my heart race in a way that was both uncomfortable and nostalgic. Those intimate moments, the excitement of late nights, and her magnetic presence were still there, but now framed by reality and principles. I understood that these feelings weren't regrets, they were lessons about self-control and recognizing what's right and wrong. During this period, I tried to reset myself. I cleared out little keepsakes, avoided the places we had gone together, and limited conversations with friends who might bring up the past. This wasn't about escaping the past. It was about re-establishing boundaries and refreshing my life. Each small action felt like a test, proving that I could control my emotions and not let the past dictate my present. Work became my main focus. I poured hours into projects, challenged myself with new responsibilities, and sought stability through achievements. Gradually, life's rhythm felt normal again, though internally there were quiet moments where I had to accept my lingering feelings. Recovery, I realized, wasn't about erasing memories. It was learning to live with them without letting them control you. Relationships around me also shifted. Some colleagues began looking at me differently, not with hostility, but curiosity, subtle avoidance, or quiet speculation. Friends had mixed reactions. Some fully supported me, saying that if they were in my shoes, they would have done the same. Others were cautious, warning that I might have overstepped. This contrast taught me that even right actions are perceived in many ways by society, and what matters most is standing firm in your own truth. Inside, my emotions were still complex. Memories of Jane sometimes stirred my heart not with desire, but with that ache of loss and the what-ifs of what could have been. But I understood that clinging to that fantasy would mean compromising my self-respect. The most important lesson: fleeting passion is never worth trading for integrity and personal values. Meanwhile, I started opening up to new relationships, but differently this time. I wasn't swept away by temporary emotions. I observed, listened, and evaluated people based on actions, honesty, and inner character, not just looks or fleeting sparks. These new connections were deeper, more meaningful, and not dictated by impulsive attraction. Another key realization was forgiveness. Not forgiving Jane, but forgiving myself for getting entangled in a difficult situation. Forgiving myself removed the emotional weight, allowed me to see things clearly, and prepared me for new choices. I learned to acknowledge negative feelings, disappointment, emptiness, loneliness, but not let them dictate my actions or current relationships. I also came to understand the value of honesty and principles in all relationships. Looking back at Jane, I realized that if I had ignored the truth, the consequences could have been far worse. Standing firm and confronting reality wasn't just a personal choice, was a way of respecting others and maintaining healthy social connections. One Sunday afternoon, I strolled through a familiar park. This time, the feeling was completely different. I felt peaceful, aware of my own value, and confident in building a new life. Each slow step, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, birdsong in the air, everything reminded me that life goes on, and I had every right to move forward with maturity and confidence day by day. I learned to manage my emotions and set boundaries. Recovery isn't a quick or easy process, it's continuous, requiring patience, and courage to face challenges without being held back by the past. The memories of Jane were no longer temptations or desires, they were valuable lessons. I separated past feelings from present decisions to avoid being misled by fleeting recollections. I also learned to understand others' motives and actions, while still maintaining my own values and principles. Another important realization was that recovery isn't just personal, it affects how we interact with the world. Every word, action, and reaction impacts those around us. Acting with honesty, integrity, and respect helps maintain credibility, confidence, and healthy relationships. Ultimately, this expanded Part 9 is about healing, recognizing, managing emotions, setting boundaries, and building new relationships. I realized that every experience, no matter how painful or uncomfortable, teaches us valuable lessons: how to stand firm, love ourselves, and create the life we truly want. Looking to the future, I feel confident, calm, and ready to move forward with a mature heart, a strong spirit, and the ability to face any challenge without being swayed by fleeting emotions or temporary temptati. Finally, after all the chaos, the intense moments, and the social conflicts, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. That reflection wasn't just a man in his early 50s. With hints of grey in his hair, it was someone who had grown, someone who had learned to balance emotion with reason, to value ethics, and to recognize personal boundaries. Memories of Jane were still there, but they were no longer temptations or sources of regret. They had become lessons, reminders of limits, honesty, and how a fleeting moment of passion could lead to significant consequences if not grounded in principles and awareness. I understood that every feeling, every decision carries weight, and how we handle it shapes who we are. Looking back, I saw that I had gone through a profound inner journey. I had learned that maturity isn't just about age or experience. It's about taking responsibility for your actions, facing the truth, and accepting consequences without running away. That is the only way to live with self-respect and genuine peace of mind. My work, social relationships, and new connections all shifted positively. I realized that holding on to principles and honesty isn't a burden, it's a solid foundation for a stable, meaningful life. I began to judge people by their actions and character rather than appearances or fleeting charm. Each new connection was based on respect, honesty, and genuine empathy. One day, sitting in a familiar cafe and watching the busy streets outside, I noticed how I had learned to live with the past without letting it dominate the present. I no longer felt frustration or longing about Jane. Instead, I had clarity, calm, and perspective. Those passionate moments had transformed into memories and lessons, not pressures or temptations. I also learned to forgive not just others, but myself. Forgiveness freed me from unnecessary guilt or regret. I realized that only through forgiveness can we find true peace and move forward through this experience. I understood that love and attraction are two very different things. Attraction can sweep us away, but real love requires time, understanding, and accountability. My experience with Jane showed me that passion without ethics or principles leaves nothing but emptiness and unpredictable consequences. True love, grounded in honesty and respect, is lasting and peaceful. I also came to value how one presents themselves to the world. Gossip, curious looks, or comments from friends and colleagues no longer bothered me. What mattered most was how I acted with integrity and principle, because those are the foundations of credibility and respect from others. Looking ahead, I felt confident, calm, and ready to face any challenge. I had learned to balance emotions and reason, desire and ethics, fleeting attraction and lasting values. The lessons from Jane and the social consequences that followed became guiding principles for all future decisions. I realized that every experience, no matter how difficult or messy, holds its own value. They help us grow, understand ourselves, and build meaningful connections. Life is never simple, but the ability to stand firm, respect oneself, and act with integrity allows us to navigate even the toughest storms. In a quiet moment at sunset, as the golden light bathed the city streets, I felt deep peace. I understood that everything that had happened was part of life, and I could move forward without regret. Maturity doesn't come from avoiding mistakes, comes from learning, facing challenges, and moving forward with courage. This final chapter of my story is about growth, self-awareness, and the ability to move forward with confidence. I learned to live by principles, uphold my values, and face every challenge with a steady spirit. I am no longer a man swept away by fleeting emotions or temporary temptation. I am someone who has matured, understands the importance of honesty and respect, and is ready to build a life of stability and peace. Looking to the future, I know life will bring more challenges, but now I am confident I can face them all. I learned the most valuable lesson: maturity, ethics, and emotional control are the foundation for all meaningful decisions and genuine happiness. With those lessons, I am ready to step forward, walk steadily, and create a life I choose for myself, grounded in self-respect, peace, and full maturity.